Welcome to the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. I'm your host, Desiree Stanley, here to share some amazing conversations. We're talking business, health, making and saving money, or starting something epic. Think of this as your go-to spot for stories that do a lot more than just kill time. They spark ideas, give you a boost, and perhaps even change the way you look at the world. I'm pulling in the experts, the thinkers, the doers, and the dreamers. We're about to dive into stories that open doors and ideas that light up your brain. Here we go. Welcome, everyone, to the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. I'm your host, Desiree Stanley, and with me today is my guest, Candice Thomas. How are you today, Candice?
I am well. Thank you so much for having me.
I am so honored to have you on the show. I'm excited for our conversation today. And just to share, Candice, you are an author, an award-winning holistic health professional, an Enneagram researcher, as well as an international speaker. And I am, again, so excited for this conversation. So thank you for joining us. Candice, I always love to ask my guests, how did this journey happen for them? Like, what was the path that led you to get to where you are now?
It was a long one. It was a long journey. Say, beginning, even as a young person, I was really a passionate reader. And when I got into college, I started learning about archetypes and in context of the hero's journey. And then I started studying mythology and studying how myths reveal things about the psyche. And somehow I was always very attracted to archetypes and self-awareness and the psyche. And when I got into acupuncture school, I was introduced to the Enneagram by a teacher there who was teaching it in the context of the more a practitioner can know themselves, the more pleasant they can be for other people. And the more they understand other people, the better bedside manner you can have. So it was sort of a class in growing yourself to be a better practitioner. But of everything I'd ever learned, the Enneagram really rocked my world. It just really lit me up in a new way. I encountered several other personality typing systems, but I especially responded to this one. And I immediately started applying it to my own life. And it just fixed so many issues. I had just moved in with my soon-to-be husband. We merged our children, and suddenly we were bickering all the time, which had never been the case when we weren't living together, and I was very concerned that I'd maybe made a big mistake. But actually, that was when I was learning about the personality types. And I took the quiz and he took the quiz, and I kind of guessed at our kids' types. And what it did for our family, it just absolutely transformed our family. So I became a real believer and very passionate in it, so that when I opened my doors as an acupuncturist, I decided to have all of my patients take the personality type quiz at the first appointment, not really knowing where it would lead, but just thinking it might be beneficial. But over a decade later, I really was able to observe long-term patterns by personality type. One of the benefits of using the Enneagram in your work as a doctor or a medical practitioner is the rapport that you develop with your clientele. And so a lot of my people I've been seeing for 10 years or longer, and knowing their personality type through that time when upheavals happen, stress happens, drama happens, happy times happen, and you can really observe how the patterning of the personality type is shifting with your feelings about yourself, the degree of conflict or stress that you're under. So it really gave me amazing insights into the personality types and how we really reckon with our life. And eventually I realized I was sitting on some really important information, some very important patterns were emerging from the study. And that is what prompted me to write the book. And so now I'm passionate to teach people more self-awareness about their personality type as a sort of as an entry point into self-healing and self-love.
So that is so fascinating to me, Candice. I always love to learn about myself. And I think that anytime that we can do that, the insights that we can gain can help us truly become better humans. As you just shared, learning about your spouse and your children and what a difference that can make in how you are as a family and working together, and how it can really help eliminate some of the squabbles and fights that we may be experiencing. So I always think that it's good to learn about ourselves. And it sounds like just a tremendous amount of information that you came upon from the years that you were collecting data from your patients. And so you have, for the YouTube viewers, you have your book behind you, and it's your Vitality Personality. And I love that. It's such a clever title. But in it, I think you describe the 9 different personality types. And so do you want to share with us just some basics about the 9 different types and how people can begin to identify?
Absolutely. I teach it a little differently than it's been taught before. I like to use 2 names per personality type to demonstrate what I'm calling the vitality personality. This is sort of your highest and best version of yourself versus your primal persona. This is our default survival hardwiring. And so we don't really like to be given the name from the primal persona. None of us are happy to identify with those names, but they're meant to be a little bit jarring to really get you to see this primal aspect that is within all of us. So I hope no one will take it personally if they don't like the names. So personality type 1, I call the altruist. No, I'm sorry. Personality type 1 is the architect or the judge. And this orients around a theme of order, the desire to put things in order. When you're in your vitality personality as the architect, you are sort of surrendering to your intuition and to a general feeling of love towards everyone as you're creating organization and order, so that the systems that you're creating are flexible and adaptable and don't require everybody to be perfect behavior in order for the system to work. When they're in their primal persona, the judge, this is a much more rigid perspective on order. This is perfectionism and trying to hold everything just so. And it actually brings up a lot of anger when things don't behave like they're supposed to. So the judge can live in a state of frustration quite a lot of the time. Any of the vitality personality, you're living in your joy. That's kind of what I'm trying to teach is if you want to live in your joy, learn about the high side of your personality type and don't identify so strongly with that primal persona. The type 2 personality type is the altruist or the victim. And they orient around the theme of giving. They really are here to be givers. When you're acting as the altruist, you are willing to be of service. However, you are not willing to allow harm to come to yourself. You are not willing to sacrifice yourself, treat yourself as less than, put yourself in a bad position in order to be of service. You need to remain strong and stable with a center of self-love towards yourself. The victim, then, I name them the victim, not because they're walking around with a poor me story, because they're not, but they're putting themselves last, and they're generally a giver in search of a taker. And they often hook up with one-sided relationships where they now are permanently the giver and never the receiver. And often they get themselves into very unhappy situations where their needs are going unmet. The type 3 is called the luminary or the pretender. This is a type oriented around the topic of worth. When they're the luminary, this is about, I already believe in my worth. I already know what I have to offer, and it's what might express who I authentically am through the work that I do. Versus the pretender is more about success first, image first. I don't have a sense of self-worth. I'm chasing a sense of self-worth. And so I'm trying to achieve and have success and be reputable in order to finally arrive at a feeling of self-worth, which kind of never gets there. I call it chasing glory. So that name, the pretender, is around creating a persona that looks successful, even though it might have nothing to do with what my personal interests are or what I actually care about. I picked this career or this image for the success, right, that it will bring. Type 4 is the creative or the diva. So this is around a theme that I call specialness. They are really attuned to what's beautiful, special, unique, rare. These are our artist types, sensitive observers of the world. When they're acting as the creative, they have mastered their own emotionalism. Out of all 9 types, the type 4 is over attached to their emotions, whereas everybody else is trying to disconnect from theirs. The 4 is overly connected, and it really gets in the way of their personality, really. So when they become a creative, but with a love of themselves, a love of everyone, and they're able to be the master of their emotions for themselves because they don't fit in, because they don't belong. They've received an enormous amount of messaging all their life that you should be more conventional, you should fit in. And that's very painful. And it does create a lot of emotionalism, a lot of reactivity. They start feeling like they need to really coddle themselves and treat themselves special because they have special needs, which is where they get that name, the diva. The type 5 is the sage or the miser. So this is a theme of wisdom. When you're the sage, you have done the deep work, you have done the research, and you're happy to share. You feel a part of community. You want to help serve community with the wisdom that you have acquired. When you're in the miser, my information is just for me, right? Types 5s are isolated, closed. Not only are they not going to share their wisdom, they're not going to share their information. They're certainly not going to share their feelings. They can be very, very closed off. So we want them to realize that part of wisdom is getting in there and experiencing stuff rather than reading about it from the sidelines. Type 6 is the guardian or the alarmist, and this orients around a theme of stability, security, integrity. So the guardian is looking out for society and community. They are very socially aware, very community involved, and they are out to help society function, thrive, and remain stable and honest. But because they're coming from a stable place themselves, whatever danger might be on the horizon, they understand that they can calmly face this because they have the resources available to reckon with anything. When they're in the state of the alarmist, they're just sort of afraid of change or anything new and unpredictable that feels scary, that feels unstable, and they become highly reactive and suspicious. So they're generally very resistant to change and sort of always arguing to keep it the way it used to be. Type 7s are the uplifter or the hedonist. This is a theme of elevation, of wanting to feel higher. As the uplifter, this is elevated consciousness, elevated vibration. This is feeling joyful and grateful and peaceful about your life. The hedonist is really more of an escapist who's saying, I can't handle pain at all. If it's not up, I'm out. And so they're finding the escape hatch with all kinds to not be present to what might be uncomfortable now. The type 8 is the leader or the bully. This orients around a theme of power. And what does power mean? As the leader, power means I want you to have power. I feel internally powerful. I trust myself. I have big energy that I love to put behind causes that mean something to me. And I want to help everybody else have their platform of power also. Versus the bully who just says, you all need to do what I want. I'm in charge. I need to make sure that I'm good. So I'm going to dominate you to make sure you give me what I want. So it's much more about control and not really worried about how other people are doing. I'm just concerned with how I'm doing, right? And then finally, the type 9 is the healer or the submissive. And this orients around a theme of peace. And what does that mean? The healer is emanating a peaceful signal. They are calm, they are generous, they are kind, they are loving, they are patient, and they create a safe space for us all, which is healing. I like to say, you don't need to be a doctor to be a healer. You don't need a medical certification to consider yourself a healer. It's that your vibe is healing to be around. versus the submissive who, instead of actively creating a peaceful environment, they're just trying not to make waves. They're trying not to make anything worse. So they kind of just give up and give in. They play a very passive role. And so often the environments that they're in are not peaceful and they continue to be volatile because they won't stand up and say, this cannot go on. I need this to change. They won't assert. So that is allowing dysfunctional things to be going on in the environment instead.
Oh, gosh. Thank you so much, Candice, for detailing that as briefly as you could. I know there's really so much depth to each of these.
Go on and on. Yeah.
Yeah. But I do appreciate you sharing that with us so that we can begin to understand these different personality types. And maybe the listeners recognized some things about themselves in what you were just sharing. I know for myself, I feel like I align a little bit more with 9 and can really see myself in that wanting to always have be peace in whatever is happening and everybody's getting along, but also can be very like, okay, I'm going to just disassociate from all of this madness that's happening. And like you share, just not stand up for maybe a situation that is not good and needs to be straightened out. But in any case, would you say that people fit into more than one of those types? And if so, how would you figure out how that all plays into you finding the best of yourself?
There is a core type, and I think that you remain that initial type all the way through your life. However, the Enneagram is so malleable and adaptable. It really allows for how diverse we really are and that we don't fit that tidily into a slot. So there's a core personality type that has that core theme that I was mentioning. And really going from the primal persona to the vitality personality is sort of like turning into somebody. It looks radically different, but it's along the same spectrum. Then you might also have what are called wings, which is your neighbor type on either side of your number. If you were a 9, then you could have a type 1 wing or a type 8 wing. And that means I'm a blend of these types. And you could be a blend of both on either side or none or one or the other at different times in your life. And then also there is something called arrows, which point to 2 other types. And generally, one is your primary arrow, where you're also emulating a lot of the traits of that personality. Other is a secondary arrow, which is more deep rooted, and you'll see that aspect of yourself occasionally. So there's quite a lot of diversity just in being your own type, how many other types you're also sharing traits with. I would say, in terms of identifying your type, when you're taking the quiz, answer for your younger self. Answer for how you were in your teens and 20s, because that's when we're totally not self-aware, right? We're just completely running on the programming. As we get out into the adult world and we start getting feedback about, nobody appreciates it when I act like this, I start learning how to modify myself, right? So you might in your 50s be answering those questions totally differently than you would have when you were 25. But in order to type yourself correctly, answer for how you were when you were 25.
Oh, that's a good point. And thank you for explaining that, because you're absolutely right. I think we do become very influenced by the world around us as we continue to grow and age. And so it would, I'm sure, impact how you're responding versus your younger self. And so I think that's a great thing to think about as we're looking at these different personality types and trying to figure out which sounds most like us. So in your book, I think that you talk about the variety of techniques that you can have people help break free of the negative behaviors that their personality type or they themselves might be portraying. And so what do you want to share with the listeners on that?
Yes, I would say step 1 is learning how to get out of the mind and into the heart, which does not come naturally to us. We're all very, very used to that mental chatter going on inside our head all day, every day. And we just get used to it and assume that that's the way we're supposed to be. But that's your ego. That is the primal persona chattering at you. And so we want to start becoming adept at turning that off. And so what you can do is actually imagine that there's an orb inside your mind that contains all those thoughts and picture descending it down into the chest and that you're kind of holding it in place with your intention in your chest. And just by having your attention on the chest, you can't have the mental two scenarios. So if you're a law of attraction person who teaches us that we create our own reality, I would tell you that the reality that we're creating from the ego mind is the 3V reality that we're currently in, with all of its war and judgment and picking sides. It's polarity. And so when we are in the mind, buying into that ego chatter, we are creating a polarized world. But we're in the heart, we're projecting a totally different reality, one that is whole, loving, complete. And when we create a reality from that space, it's a much more peaceful and harmonious place to live. So that takes practice. So I would recommend doing it when you're puttering, when you're driving, when you're doing dishes, when you're doing the laundry. Do it while holding your energy in your chest and just sort of trying to keep it there. And you would be amazed at how calm you feel, at how quiet you feel. So that's step one. And then I've got a few more methods that I like to teach. I call them the real you methods because I want you to connect to the real you, which is your soul, right? Your spirit, which is always loving, always joyful, always peaceful. So these methods are for helping you fully process your feelings, release them so you're not in a loop anymore. And I've got a great exercise for clearing out themes that keep recurring in your life. Like you may have had a childhood wound and then you notice you just keep having experiences that trigger it over and over again. So I like to teach a method called the integration exercise that teaches you how to heal that, how to actually resolve that initial wound and quiet that whole theme that's been sabotaging you so that you can move into a much happier reality.
Oh gosh, that sounds fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Candice. I think it's interesting that we do tend to allow our mind to just run free. And I think this idea that you just shared about kind of bringing it down into our heart, into that different space, it changes that up for a minute, right? And allows us to be looking at things differently in a different way. And so I think that's a great suggestion that each of us can do just right away and to come out of that headspace. So thank you again for that. You talk about journaling as well. And so what do you suggest is it just like free writing? Is there specific prompts that you suggest? Or what do you feel about journaling that helps people?
Yeah, I think journaling it doesn't need to be like an appointment book where, dear diary, today I had a dentist appointment. This is inner work journaling. This is creating space for you to be alone with yourself. I always like to start with 5 things I love about myself and 5 things I'm grateful for in my life because of course, we're all taught that we're not worthy of the love and that we're all bad and wrong in ways. So we really need regular reminders that there are things about our love. And what I really like to point out, when I give this homework to some people, they're actually baffled. They're like, okay, I love myself because I helped that old lady with her getting the door open. Or it's basically, I love myself for the task that I completed or the action that I took. And that's not what we want. We want to love qualities about ourselves. So instead of, I love this action that I took that proves that I'm a good person, you want to say, I love my generous part. I love my desire to be helpful. It's more about the person that I am rather than the actions that I take. Because again, in our world, it's all about you're only as good as the actions. You kind of have to prove that you're worthy of love. And so that exercise is to help you realize that you are already lovable the way you are. And then, of course, gratitude is always an excellent entry point into helping you raise your vibration, raise your sense of enjoyment in your life and peace, as if you remember to give energy and focus to the positive things in your life. We're much more inclined to complain. So that's where I would start.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that's a great place to start in those two things. And it's so interesting that you were talking about how we really are always like, I did this thing that makes me good, that makes me worthy, instead of just innately, I am worthy, I am lovable, and like that. And so using this as a reminder, it's going to take some time for some people to come up with these. But once you begin, I think that you'll find more come easily, right?
Yes. Instead of giving yourself permission to give yourself that way at all. A lot of us are under the belief that that's being conceited or self-absorbed. To praise yourself in any way makes you bad. But really, the amount of love that we're capable of feeling for ourselves is the amount of love we're capable of experiencing in this life. Like we can't manifest higher levels of love that we don't actually embody. So the more we become willing to acknowledge that we are lovable the way we already are, the more you can expand your love and happiness that you'll experience in your life.
Yeah, and everything boils down to love, right? It really, really does. Great stuff. Oh my gosh. So I think that when you were sharing about the patients that you were working with and the data that you were really establishing, did you see patterns? And did you see the different personality types having different like happiness and well-being levels or pain levels, that kind of thing? What did you find?
Oh, that's such a great question. It's such interesting information. So, one of the first things that I started noticing is what I started calling the sabotage pattern, which is basically a word that I've given to summarize all the different impulses of that ego structure within the personality type. So, that type 1 judge, that sabotage pattern is called rigidity. That type 2 victim, the sabotage pattern is called self neglect. The type 3 pretender sabotage pattern is called chasing glory. The type 4 diva, the sabotage pattern is called melancholy. The type 5 miser, the sabotage pattern is called contraction. The type 6 alarmist, the sabotage pattern is called overreacting. The type 7 hedonist, the sabotage pattern is called self-medication. And the type 8 bully, the sabotage pattern is called force. And the type 9 submissive, the sabotage pattern is called inaction. So right away, this is sort of the loop that each of these types are stuck in. And what happens is it starts with the beliefs, and we don't even realize we're holding these beliefs. They're in our unconscious. I've identified what I call the survival belief of each of the 9 types. And so this belief is a scarcity-oriented belief around how to survive. And it's not accurate. But as long as you believe that it's true, it then shapes what your thoughts are focusing on. You're looking for this all the time because this is what you're supposed to be on alert about for your own survival. So the thoughts always prompt a feeling, right? I think a thought and I have a feeling that comes with it. So if I have a pattern of thoughts that are negative, that are scarcity and survival oriented, that hold me in a place of resistance, then I'm creating feelings that match those low vibration thoughts, right? So now I've got shame, I've got anger, I've got frustration, I've got fear, and that is what ultimately becomes a health pattern. So I started seeing health outcomes that were clearly the result of what you've been focusing on and how that makes you feel, and then where that lodges in the body and what that turns into becomes really, really fascinating. So that type 1 with the sabotage pattern of rigidity, I noticed that they actually were experiencing a lot of physical rigid tension in the body because they're gritting their teeth, they're holding their breath, they're kind of fighting through their day, trying to be good all the time, even though there's all these jerks all around me behaving badly, right? I'm getting mad at everybody. And so I'm holding my breath, I'm gritting my teeth. It's an enormous amount of pressure through the throat, the neck, the shoulders. It locks down the digestion. And so I do see migraines, neck and shoulder pain, all that sort of upper neck tension, constipation, and sports injury from holding your body in a very rigid way makes you more prone to injury. Versus the type 2, they are generally wishing and longing that people appreciated them for all the good, sweet that they do. But instead, they're mostly hooked up with takers who don't say thank you, who don't notice, who just feel entitled. And so now I'm in this loop of feeling neglected, feeling sad, feeling invisible. And so I like to have sugar to help boost me, right? So I see a lot of diabetes among the type 2. And also I see sciatica, fixed pain, a pinch in the low back. Low back is nobody supporting me. I am unsupported, right? So we get a pinch in the low back, which creates nerve pain shooting down the legs. Leg pain is showing you I'm not taking the appropriate next step in my life. So I'm getting a lot of physical signals that I'm not happy with the way things are, but I'm not willing to look at it, you know? So there are patterns for all 9 types where I can see the loop of thoughts turns into feelings, turns into health outcomes. And it's been absolutely fascinating.
Oh my gosh, I agree. Just listening to what you were sharing, even just those few examples, I can absolutely see how that would be the case. We do have these thoughts which cause feelings and changes the perception also that we have of our world, right? And the idea of the rigidity. And so it's causing that pain in these different places. I absolutely can see that. So it's so fascinating. And do you go into detail more in the book on all the different types and maybe some of the health things that they might be experiencing?
That is actually in book 3, which is out next year. It took me 3 books to map out my whole system. So book 1 is I'm using a graphic called the mandala, which spells out this primal persona architecture and the vitality personality, the shifts you would make to get up into the high signs, including that sabotage pattern. So I do go into how the sabotage pattern is affecting the mind, the body, and the heart. Book 2 will be addressing those things we talked about, like wings and arrows, these additional factors that are drivers on how we present our personality type. And then the 3rd book will be about the type in real life. And I look at 5 areas of love, work, health, money, and purpose.
Oh gosh, that's so exciting.
2025.
Okay. For sure, I'll be including the details of the book that you have out now, Vitality Personality. And if you want to give me details on the 2 upcoming books, absolutely, I'll include those as well for the listeners to check out when they are released. So congratulations on that. And that's so exciting. But let's talk now about how we might use our personality type to impact our relationships in good ways and bad ways.
Yeah. So I recommend always beginning with yourself. And that seems to be the natural impulse is we get the book, it has all 9 types, and we just skip to our own type, right? And that is where you should start, is begin with your own self-awareness. But as soon as you see how accurate it is, then you start getting interested in what type is my spouse, what type are my kids, what type is my boss. And what it immediately starts showing you is how incredibly differently we are wired from one another. And there is no such thing as normal or right. And so we get into a lot of our interpersonal conflict in believing I'm good, you're bad, I'm right, you're wrong. And so when you start realizing, no, it's just a totally different belief system and they're coming from a way I would never have thought of it before, So it really allows more tolerance, more acceptance, more forgiveness. It holds you in a less judgmental position where you're more willing to consider that other people have a valid perspective too. And I think it's so useful in parenting. My kids were little when I first got introduced to the Enneagram, and they are a type 4 and a type 5, which are the deepest introverts. So they're the hardest to get to know, right? But having that insight of the personality types and what are those impulses, even if they're not talking about it, really, really helped me support them during those stressful school years. So it's just a great way of showing up for yourself and showing up for other people.
Yeah, and I can absolutely see how having this information about yourself, about your spouse and your children, again, can make things so much better because, like you just said, you can support them because you are understanding of where they're coming from and the things that they're experiencing because of their beliefs. And so you can, instead of headbutting because you're coming from this way and they're this way, you can be more like joining arms. Like, I understand where you're coming from because I know these things about you, and vice versa. And so I think that that's so great. And again, anytime we can learn more about ourselves and learn about other people, it really does help us bridge that gap. And like you said, stop the judgment.
Yeah. I had a really interesting conversation the other day with a woman who is my age. She's in her 50s. And so she's got a parent in their late 70s or maybe 80s. And she's getting in car accidents and she really needs to surrender that driver's license. But she's such a strong-willed woman that she's very defensive, angry, won't reason. And so the daughter is saying to me, I don't know how to talk to her, about this. Like, she just will not consider that she needs to give up the license. And so this is where knowing the personality type really helps you discover how to deal with this person. So her mother is a type 8. The leader or the bully, right? So this is all around power, wanting to feel strong, wanting to be autonomous. Vulnerability is your nightmare. It's your trigger, right? It's exactly what you're trying to shut down. And aging is to become vulnerable, whether you like it or not. It's a lot of older people feel that their body is betraying them, right? And so she's in her nightmare, right? She's completely triggered at this point. And that is why she's so belligerent, so defensive, so angry. Well, the great thing about a type 8, the flip side of them being a painfully blunt communicator when you're on the receiving end, is that that's how they like to be spoken to. So you can actually be extremely blunt and frank with them, and they will respect you more, not less. So when you're dealing with a type 8, irrational, angry parent, you're going to say, look, Mom, I can see you're furious at the fact that your eyes are failing, that your hearing is going. I understand. You must be so frustrated and angry. But you've harmed 2 people. This is not safe. What do you recommend we do? You just spell it out. You're not going to worry about hurting their feelings. You're going to say it in bullet points because then they can hear it. So learning what is somebody's trigger and how do they like to be communicated with can really help you navigate some stressful situations.
Yeah. And again, that's so good. So good, Candice. You're absolutely right. Understanding how people want to be communicated to is going to make a difference in them hearing what you're saying.
Yeah.
And so it's just can't do anything but help you in your life. So I think it's just tremendous. So good stuff. Oh my gosh, there's so many more things that we could talk about, but I want to ask you this now. Is there anything that you want to share with the person listening that we haven't talked about so far that you really think they need to know? What would you share?
Okay, so this is coming from my personal beliefs and my work as an acupuncturist and a past life regression hypnotist. But I think it would really serve people to understand a little bit more about reincarnation because this eases your fear of death, right? Which is kind of behind a lot of that survival scarcity triggers is, oh no, I'm going to be harmed. Something bad could happen to me. And so actually getting a bit of a bigger perspective on that you don't die when you die and you do see your friends and your family again, it really brings a lot of peace to your heart. So my favorite book to recommend to a beginner learning about that is called Journey of Souls by Michael Newton. He was also past life regression hypnotist, but he didn't intend to be. And so he was on a journey of they started popping out in the hypnosis. But what he specifically became interested in was, okay, so if you're telling me you can remember your past life, and now you're telling me you can remember that you crossed over, and now you're up above your body watching everybody, do you remember where you went after that? Then what did you do? Then where did you go? And so he collected like 30 years of case studies of what people experience once they crossed over. And there's actually a system on the other side. And so learning about this, I think, can bring so much peace to people's hearts. Oh, it eases grief, it eases fear. So I find that to be pretty important. And then another one that I recommend is The Law of Attraction, the basic teachings of Abraham. We've kind of moved forward in our understanding of what manifestation with Law of Attraction means. The original teachings were coming out in the 80s. We were more concerned with manifesting ego desires, right? A big house, lots of money, like what may look like a big shot manifestations. Right. So I would say that the caveat to that is you manifest real things your higher self wants. That's where the power is. But to understand that you are creating your reality with your thoughts and your feelings, and that you need to be in charge of your thoughts and feelings and take responsibility for the reality that you're experiencing. So when people come into me with health issues, so for example, say I'm coming in for cancer, I'm of the belief that this cancer has happened to me. I've got nothing to do with it. I'm powerless to reckon with it. I would have them looking at what are the thoughts and the feelings that have been creating this vibe that I'm living in. And can I heal my outward reality by healing my vibration inwardly? So it sort of dovetails with the Enneagram work that I teach.
Thank you for sharing that. And it's so interesting to me. I love those recommendations, so I'll be sure to include those also. But I think that it's so fascinating, the point that you made about the manifestation and how a lot of people do it just for those outward things, right? The cars, the money, the house, whatever. But I do feel like there's been a bit of a shift where people are looking to just make their life outwardly better, and not just monetarily or that kind of way, but just in general better. And so I think that's interesting.
Yeah. So it's just saying, instead of saying, I want $10 million, you're going to say, I want ease, I want freedom, I want security, or the feelings that would make you feel happy versus.
Yeah. Yeah. And as we really all know, the stuff doesn't make us happy. That never makes anybody feel better, even though we convince ourselves that it will. So that's an interesting thing to think about. Well, Candice, you did share the books that you thought would be helpful, and I appreciate that. And you mentioned to me before we started that you really enjoy some YouTube channels. And so if you want to share those with the listeners now, I can include the details in the show notes.
Okay, so like I was telling you, my favorite YouTube stuff that I watch is pretty esoteric. I'm very attracted to channelers. So these are psychics who are bringing through information from the other side. And what I'm finding in my work, frankly, as a practitioner, is more and more people's psychic abilities are activating. We seem to be in an era of more and more of our right brain self coming online. And so I can recommend a couple of great shows that feature channeled information. So one is called Out of This World, which is this lovely Canadian woman who is channeling and her best friend who's facilitating. And it offers very unusual, unexpected information. And also I like Just Tap In with Emilio Ortiz. So he's interviewing a lot of the sort of spiritual leaders and alternative thinkers. And I find his guests really fascinating.
Oh, excellent. Well, thank you for those recommendations. I will include the details in the show notes. And so, Candice, thank you again so much for sharing this amazing information with us and really helping us learn that it's important for us to learn about ourselves so that we can communicate with others. We can help heal ourselves and the world in the process. And so, again, thank you so much for your time and this information. Before we close out, would you share with the listeners how they can find you if they want to follow along the work you're doing, if it's social sites that you want to share, if they have questions they want to ask you, how would they be able to do that?
Yeah, I would say to begin at the website, yourvitalitypersonality.com, because that has the free quiz to find out your personality type. So that's generally where you're going to want to start is take the quiz and find out your own type. And you can find out about the book there as well. And there are links to my YouTube and Facebook and Instagram pages.
Perfect. So I will include the details as well. Again, Candice, thank you so much. This has just been a wonderful conversation. And the details that you've shared with us from your book, Vitality Personality, is tremendous. So thank you so much for that. And I'm assuming the listeners can pick that up from all the book retailers and
Amazon, Barnes and Noble, wherever books are sold, as they say.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you again, Candice. Appreciate your time, and we'll talk more soon.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, dear listeners, for tuning in to another insightful episode of the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. We appreciate your time and curiosity as we explore fascinating topics together. If you enjoyed today's discussion, be sure to join us next week for another amazing episode. Remember, your journey of learning and growth is a continuous adventure, and we're thrilled to be part of it. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until next week, stay curious and keep exploring those pockets of knowledge.